AMD's 9070 series is out, and we got our hands on one as we're switching from the Nvidia RTX 3080. That's right, we're going Team Red after the whole Nvidia 5000 series dumpster fire. In this video, we'll compare the Asus 9070 OC to the RTX 3080 in games and production benchmarks. We'll see if the $649 price tag was worth the upgrade. Now, if you've seen some of the other 9070 reviews, you already know that the 9070 matches and even passes the RTX 5070 in almost every test. But let's drill down and compare this new edition against my older RTX 3080. The Asus Prime OC 9070 comes with 16 gigs of VRAM. That's a full 6 gigs more than the 3080. It has higher clock and boost speeds and uses PCIe 5.0 rather than the 3080's 4.0 connection. Jumping into the first game, we test Cyberpunk at 1440p high settings. I only play in 1440p, so we're not doing any 4K tests today. We run 3 passes on each card, one with raw rasterization, one with DLSS quality or FSR quality, and the last with ray and path tracing enabled. Looking at the results, the 9070 outperforms the 3080 by 39 frames per second in raw rasterization. In the DLSS versus FSR test, the 3080 comes in at 113 frames per second average, and the 9070 hits a fast 162. Last, in the ray tracing test, both cards come in at sub 40 frames per second with only 5 frame differential. Ray tracing is still a weak point for the AMD cards. Moving on to an older title with a built-in benchmark, F1 2018 screams on the 9070 at 299 frames per second, while the 3080 manages a decent 230 frames per second in raw rasterization. There's no FSR or DLSS in this game, and it doesn't seem to matter. Next up, we have GTA 5 Enhanced Edition. In raw rasterization, the 3080 scores 140 frames per second average, while the 9070 hits 150. Not a huge difference there at all. Turning on DLSS and FSR, the 9070 scores 142 frames per second, and the 3080 matches that average score of 142. Turning on ray tracing for both cards only dropped the frames by about 5 to 10%, with both being very close in performance. Madden 25 is another title I play a lot. At 1440p max settings, the 3080 manages 91 frames per second average, while the 9070 swings past at 124 frames per second. Not a bad increase, and the upgrade is looking good so far. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is another GPU crusher. The 3080 hits 85 frames per second in raw raster, and the 9070 cruises past it at 113 frames per second. Testing DLSS and FSR, the 9070 grabs 147 frames per second, and the 3080 hits 110. In arguably one of the most graphically intense scenes, AMD pulls a decent win. PUBG, another still very popular title and one I play a lot, is our next test. The 3080 pulls in 190 frames per second average in deathmatch. The 9070 comes in close at 193 frames per second. A very close, if not even, race between the two cards. This game is all raw rasterization. Another GPU killer is Stalker 2. We put the 3080 to the test and get 62 frames per second in raw rasterization. The 9070 gets 78 frames on average. DLSS versus FSR, the 9070 makes it to 90 frames per second, as the 3080 only hits 66. Another clear win for AMD, but not the monster frames I was expecting. Arma Reforger is a big surprise, with the 3080 beating the 9070 87 frames per second to 66 in raw rasterization. This game is not a strong point at all for the 9070. We didn't do a super sampling test, as FSR1 is all Arma supports currently on the AMD side. Path of Exile 2 is our last games test. The 3080 makes it to 122 frames per second in raw raster, and the 9070 only manages 96. The 3080 is fighting tooth and nail to avoid this upgrade. In DLSS versus FSR, things are not much better, with the 9070 hitting 137 frames per second and the 3080 shooting past it at 159. Clearly an Nvidia optimized game. Since I not only game, but I also do photo editing and video production regularly, I wanted to benchmark production with the 9070. In the Puget Photoshop benchmark, the 3080 scores 9950. 10,120 is the score we get from the 9070. In the Puget Premiere Pro benchmark, we see a bit of the same, with the 3080 hitting 11195 versus 12722 from the 9070. We tried to run the DaVinci benchmark, but the AMD card kept crashing during testing. So, with a mixed bag of results in games and a clear win in production, is the RX 9070 a good upgrade over the aging RTX 3080? The 16 gigs of VRAM versus the 10 gigs is going to help the 9070 win out in heavy textured, graphically intense games, but the raw CUDA power of the 3080 still packs a punch in some of today's titles. Depending on the title and optimization, performance can go either way for either card. The 9070 is a brand new card, and the drivers haven't had time to mature just yet, like on the Nvidia side for the 3080. While I may miss some frames in some games, the AMD card does what I need it to do as a whole. With the additional VRAM, FSR4 support, and about the same power usage, I'll give this upgrade a B-. I would have liked to get the RX 9070 XT, but the horde of people trying to get one at launch day made it nearly impossible. If you're thinking of upgrading and have questions or comments, leave those down below. Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit the like button if you found this video helpful or entertaining. Thanks again, and I love you people.